Welcome to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast, where non-diet nutrition, weight-inclusive care, and integrative health collide. We're your hosts, Dana Montes and Christina Hoyt, licensed integrative clinical nutritionists and body image coaches.
And we believe you deserve to have a joyful relationship with food in your body, even if you have a chronic health condition or symptoms that just won't quit. On this show, together and with our guests, we're bringing the real talk, no BS vibe with tangible tools to help you pursue health and wellness without obsession or restriction.
Remember our disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So today we have a listener questions episode. So questions inspired by or given to us by you all. Some of our patrons asked questions. We've kind of collected some questions from Instagram over the past month or two, I would say.
Yeah.
And the first one that we wanted to touch on is kind of a continuation of the discussion that we've been having about Oprah and Ozempic, and when we talked about the, quote, natural forms of Ozempic that are going around a couple of weeks ago. So the first recommendation I would make is to listen to our Patreon exclusive episode on the Oprah special that came out, the last one, not this one, but the one that came out in March. We have an episode about that, so I will link that in the show notes. And then I would also highly recommend listening to our episode on the, quote, natural forms of Ozempic, because we do a lot of myth busting there. One last thing before we get started today, in case you missed it last week on our Patreon exclusive bonus end of month episode, which we are still looking for a good title for, we talked all about hormonal birth control and fertility fear-mongering, which unfortunately we've been seeing a lot more of recently. And there's obviously a lot of nuance to this conversation, so we really wanted to take the time to dig into it. So if you're interested, the link will be in the show notes. But now we have some new shit coming out. And Christina, I would like you to go with this one.
I have so many feelings. I think the main point is don't go watch this, you guys. We're watching it so you don't have to. And it's incredibly triggering for a lot of people. I think one of the things that we're seeing now is this new special that's coming out called like Making the Shift or something like that. I think it's like an online event. I'm not exactly sure where it's being broadcast or whatever, but we're going to watch it and we're going to do a deep dive into it over the summer. It will come out on Patreon. But I think one of the things to me that don't watch it. I don't know what else to say, because for most people, it's incredibly triggering. And what's really hard is that right now we're seeing diet culture do what diet culture does best, and that's collect people and shift their language, shift their narrative to be what the masses need to hear. And that's exactly what's happening. And I think a lot of people, what we're seeing is a really difficult shift for people, seeing that people that they have followed that were big in this space, talking about anti-diet culture and no body shaming and all these things, being asked and accepting to join in on this special. And in Oprah's events about Ozempic. And it's really hard as an outsider and as a professional to see it and not say like, hey, what are we doing here, guys? Like, why are you joining in on this narrative? And I think the reason for me and why I think a lot of it is because it's compelling, right? There are parts of you that I could imagine as a professional, if I got asked to go on Oprah, that's fucking huge for your business and your platform and everything like that. So that's amazing to be asked. Also, Oprah has always had this kind of like untouchable kind of vibe to her. Like so people always feel like they want to be a part of everything that she's doing and that she's like impenetrable, and everything she touches turns to gold. And they're right. Everything she touches does turn to gold, including Ozempic. And right now, they have a really great marketing team teaching them exactly how to market to the people who are as vulnerable as possible to get this medication. And that's us. The people who are the most vulnerable are the ones who are equal parts anti-fat phobia and also at the same time want to protect themselves from it. And that is the majority and the masses of the people out there. And Ozempic and Oprah are really playing into that as an industry. And I think we have to remember to separate our feelings or what our perceived feelings are of Oprah and the language that they're using in these types of specials and the reality that this is a business and they're all businesses looking to capitalize. And as much as they're talking about how they don't want to capitalize off people's vulnerabilities anymore, they're like the perfect freaking poster child for doing exactly that right now. And it's incredibly difficult to watch. And it's really disheartening to see people that you follow and you like and you love who have felt like a safe space now joining in on that conversation. And that's really scary, but also speaks to how incredibly vulnerable body image and weight stigma truly is. And so to me, it's more of like, I'm equal parts frustrated, disappointed, and also my heart goes out to them because they're clearly struggling.
So what Christina is referencing here is that for
Oh, yeah.
this
Sorry,
new
Dana.
special,
I just jumped right into my feels. Now you guys know.
so what she's specifically referencing, that the spoiler alert was at the beginning of that. Now you know the ending before we go to the beginning. No, so what she's referencing here is for this event that happened mid-May, so a couple weeks ago when this episode comes out,
May
is
9th, I think, yeah.
for this event, which was, by the way, put on by Weight Watchers, of course. They invited some people in the body positive anti-diet space to take part in this event. And a lot of our listeners and people that had reached out to us about this were like, I am feeling so conflicted about this because on the one hand, you would hope that these types of people would enter this type of event to bring a different perspective and be like, hey, this has been doing a lot of damage. And we want you to see that perspective. But at the same time, seeing influencers in the body image space who are attending this kind of thing can bring a lot of conflicting, rightly, feelings because there's no way they're not getting paid to do this. And that means that they're getting paid by Weight Watchers to do this. And we don't know, because we haven't seen it yet, what ended up happening at this event. But it's very kind of icky feeling. And it's interesting because we were diving into some of the people that were invited to this event and looking in like the posts that they had been sharing about it before it happened and then their comment sections and stuff. And even their own audiences are like, what are you doing? What are you actually doing? And to give you a kind of encapsulation of what a lot of these comments were saying is we found one from someone named Dr. Katherine Kardell, who practices in Minnesota. And she said, this is on Jen Hatmaker's post, which I think she has actually deleted by now, but we screenshotted it because receipts. So this doctor wrote, I love you, Jen, but as a physician who spends her career treating eating disorders, I'm saddened by this, meaning your decision to go on this special. There's no way that a company that exists only to sell weight loss, aka Weight Watchers, can sponsor an event like this authentically. This is marketing. This is getting people to talk about Weight Watchers and send them to their website. Weight Watchers is trying to co-opt a really important conversation for their benefit. It's disingenuous and gross. It is literally my life's work to counter diet culture and support people in developing self-worth that is not associated with their body shape or size. This special will only contribute diet culture and feels like a mockery of a deeply important issue. I urge you to disengage from this event. This is not just a table that isn't set perfectly, which is something that Jen, I think, had posted earlier. And again, that's from Dr. Katherine Kardell, who's Kate Kardell on Instagram.
And who we reached out to, and I'm hoping to hear back from her. I think she accepted my friend request, and I'm very excited. I really want her to come on and talk about it. So shout out to you, Dr. Katherine Kardell. I really hope you come on. We do like your opinion a lot. You know what's interesting is as I was listening to that, the only way that I think Weight Watchers can come out of this as actually me personally ever believing any of the stuff that they're spouting right now on a true core level of indication of change is if they change their entire business to be a nonprofit and offered therapy for all the people who have been stigmatized by their weight forever, and like helping the people out with this whole thing instead of coming in with a weight loss drug that issued like a weight loss drug and then talking about how we shouldn't shame people for people's bodies. It's like, I just like, ew, ew, to the nth degree. It's giving real nasty vibes.
And if you had listened to our Patreon exclusive Oprah deep dive special, we had talked about how on that episode, they're basically claiming the cure to weight stigma is to take this drug and to lose weight so that you won't experience weight stigma anymore. Instead of, let's work to get at the root cause of weight stigma, which we have been perpetuating, aka Weight Watchers, and all these other companies, and Ozempic and all these other drug companies are continuing to perpetuate. So it's just like a whole,
while at the same time taking and utilizing the research about how diets are ineffective, that people in this world have been collecting and doing and showing that they've been like, that's not true. This is working. That's nonsense. And now when it's in their back pocket and they can throw everyone towards this drug to make gobs and gobs of money, let's not kid ourselves, and to make their stakeholders more money in their pocket. Now they're on board with the education that the research-backed education that these diets and these restrictive protocols don't actually work and actually do more damage. They literally said that in the original Oprah special. Like, I also am kind of like, what is this special about if it wasn't covered in the first special? To me, it's more of like, how can I continue to double down and bring these people in? And now we're bringing in people that people look up to in that field, and we're shifting the narrative to make it be like, they're cool with us, so you should be. And it's like, ew, real gross. Like I wonder too, like if you, I don't know, it's just, you guys don't watch it.
well, one of our
Don't
listeners
watch it.
also was telling us that post the special, there's also like a 3-hour follow-up or something to it.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So
I mean,
who knows? We're going to watch it for you. We'll post it and share it in the summer and you'll see.
right quick, before we jump on to the next listener's question. But before this, so I think one of the things that I've been hesitant about really talking about this is that I'm like, well, I haven't watched it yet. So let's like give it a pause and maybe it's not that bad or blah, blah, blah. Right.
Okay.
Right. Giggle, haha, trying to like give them the benefit of the doubt because that's just the nature, my personality, whatever. But here's the thing, guys. No one's in the comment section now applauding them for all the ways that they stood up to that. None of them are.
No, because the comments are turned off.
So it's even worse. So to me, all this shows is that it must have been exactly what everyone feared. And now everyone's really upset and hurt, and understandably so. But at the same time, I also think, like, to me, this really shows the damage of weight stigma and the desire to want to protect yourself from it. And these people are going in with huge platforms, and we know how nasty people are on their platforms or whatever, and saying really terrible things about people in larger bodies who are talking about being, body positive and weight neutral and having body liberation, all this stuff, and like attacking them. So it makes sense that they would want to, like, there's this part of me that's really compassionate and also very angry that, like, man, we thought you did this work. We thought you were a safe space to stand up for yourself and for all of us. And now I'm learning that maybe that wasn't the case. And that's a real bummer.
Mm-hmm.
Real bummer.
Yeah. So these are all really just based on what we had seen on these people's posts prior to the event happening. And then we will hold off our future thoughts until we've watched it and we'll share it with you. And then after that's posted, I'll link it in the show notes of this episode as well. So if you're listening to this in the future, you can just go to the show notes and click on it.
And you can find it. You can find it real quick. All right. The next question I think is something else that I need to answer too. So we had a Spotify question actually, which is really fun. I don't know if people knew this, but you can actually write questions and comments directly to us in Spotify. Yay. I hope you all use that. I would love to hear from you in little comments and questions and whatever. And so this one is going out to that person who they said, I think I have ARFID. And this was on the ARFID episode. If you haven't listened to that, that's really cool and awesome with, oh gosh, with Rebecca and Stephanie. And they said, what is the purpose of getting a diagnosis if I'm like 99% sure that I already have it? Well, I think that's a really valid question. I think that kind of goes with anything health related and eating disorder related too. I think there's a lot of people out there who really feel that getting a diagnosis is validating of their experience. And so for people out there who really want that, that can also kind of give them an indication in that validation from external validation that, hey, I am actually dealing with this and I'm suffering with this and I do need that. And also, too, the other question is then does that change your perspective on the need for support? Right. So if you have this diagnosis and you get that validation, does it make it easier for you to then go and access support that you want? The answer could be yes and or no. You might say, no, I don't really need that kind of validation. I already know that I have it. I don't need to go down that rigmarole of getting formally diagnosed. So whatever. I can just find a practitioner, work with them and know that I have this and it doesn't really matter to me. You also don't need to have a diagnosis to get support. So that's like one piece of it. And then the other part is sometimes in a very real way, it changes your access to support. So for someone who might have ARFID, there might be the need for an occupational therapist. There might be a need for a lot of other different things that could be supportive for you. And so to me, it really comes down to, do I want to have that access? Will this diagnosis change that access, especially if it's a child? And they're having like all of those things too. That could also play a big role in access to support. And so to me, it really comes down to, does this change the trajectory of your support? And does it change your access to it and whether or not you feel like you need that or not? But overall, I don't really feel like with anything, do you ever need a diagnosis for it? Unless it's medication based, like obviously you need something then if it's going to change your access to medication. But that's basically it.
Yeah, one thing I want to bring out about this before we go into the next question is not necessarily related to ARFID, but just in general diagnosing and diagnoses. Christina mentioned a really great point about sometimes when you get a diagnosis, it feels like a validation of your experience. But I also want to bring up the counterpoint of if you don't quite meet the diagnostic criteria, that doesn't mean that your experience is invalid.
Oh, 100%.
And I know you agree with that.
Yeah.
But I think
or that you don't need access to support, right? And I think like that's a major part too. I actually find sometimes with my eating disorder clients that sometimes getting the diagnosis or getting the lab work done is, especially if you're anorexic, right? If you go to the doctor and you're getting your medical clearance, which I sometimes need to do with highly restrictive clients because one, your health and safety is number one. And so we got to check the boxes. And so to me, I feel like sometimes with that type of thing, it can be in some ways really inhibitory for someone getting things because they'll say like, well, I'm not sick enough. So I don't really actually need the support. And so the way that I've always described it to clients is, okay, this doesn't tell us whether or not you need help or that you need support. You already needed that the moment you asked for it. So done, that ship has sailed, right? Like don't even think about that. What this information is really telling us is what is the level of support and level of triage that you might need for support for your unique presentation of this, right? And so to me, if a client comes back to me and says, hey, I got medical clearance, everything's good to go, I say, great, you still have anorexia, but great news, you don't have to go inpatient right now. Your immediate immediate health and safety is not throwing off alarm bells where I'm like, oh, wow, you need to go to the hospital. It's now more of okay, we have room here to work on this outpatient and we have the benefit of time. If it comes back where it's the opposite, it's like, okay, now we actually need to rally. Thank God we got that blood work now that we know. you need to go to the hospital. You need to get more information. You need to get more support and get all those things managed so that you're stable so that we can go on. The same thing can be done for any number of things. It doesn't change the way that whether or not your experience is real or not. It really, to me, shows, okay, what do I get access to? Do I need access to it? And what does that look like for my long-term recovery plan and support healing plan, if that makes sense?
I see this a lot with GI stuff. So to give an example, like just because you have been dealing with GI symptoms that are very severe for a really long time, and then you go maybe get a workup or something, and they're like, great, you don't have Crohn's or colitis. That doesn't mean that nothing is going on. That doesn't mean that there's not inflammation in the colon. That doesn't mean that there's not like a lot of very intense GI symptoms that are disrupting your daily life. That just means that you don't have Crohn's or colitis. And that means that there are not the long-term ramifications of Crohn's and colitis as an almost guarantee if you do not go on specific medications, right? So GI is also very complicated in here as well, because just because you don't have one thing, it doesn't mean that you don't have a whole bunch of other things. It's just most of the time, we doctors or whatever testing you have or haven't done isn't necessarily looking for the right things or in the right places. So that's just another point to
also
bring up.
I mean, we could also go on to every kind of diagnosis that there is out there, right? When you're getting things done. I just recently went through this, and Dan and I were talking about it ad nauseum, about how nice it would be to have a diagnosis for something so that you can then be like, okay, now I know what to do about it. But when it doesn't, it can be really discouraging. And so to me, I feel like in some ways, don't let the lack of a diagnosis change the fact that there's support that can be given, or that it's needed in any way. And also at the same time, you don't need a formal diagnosis to say that you need support. Period. That's how I look at it.
Yep. 100%. Okay, next one is, speaking of GI related. So
yes.
If someone asked, I've been seeing people post about how eating 30 plants per week can boost the diversity and health of the gut microbiome. What do you think about this?
What I think is, what now? I think bloating. I think that's that's giving it's giving privilege, grocery price privilege. That's what that's giving me.
Okay, well, so here's the thing, right? It's like we like to have a lot of yes and conversations. I'm sure that eating 30 plants per week could boost the diversity and the health of the gut microbiome.
In a lab experiment.
No, for everybody. I'm sure that would be the case. But what you were kind of alluding to is like access and practicality.
Yeah.
And this is not something, just like everything, this is not something that can be a blanket statement taken by anybody and their mom on the street and things are going to be all happy-go-lucky in your guts. Because if you are someone who has any kind of GI issues and you all of a sudden increase to 30 plants per week from, let's say, 10 or 5 or whatever it is, your gut's going to be like, what is going on? I am not ready for this. I am not prepared for this. I cannot break all this down. And so it can, if you jump from 0 to 100 real quick in terms of the diversity of the plants and the quantity of the plants that you're eating, it's probably not going to be great in the beginning.
Let's start with eating 30 bites of plants a week. Dana's rolling her eyes at me, you guys.
No, I was just laughing. I wasn't rolling my eyes at you. It's like, here's the thing, is it really depends where you're starting from.
Yeah.
Because what they're really getting at here, the nitty gritty, is like, if you eat a diversity of plant fibers, that's going to increase the diversity of the types of food that your gut microbiota are getting. And so it's going to, the prebiotic fibers in there, which feed your gut bacteria, are going to multiply, hopefully in a good way.
Yeah.
And then you can have more health benefits based on that. Great. If that is like the gold star standard or whatever, we have to figure out how can we make this more accessible and realistic given your particular health access, socioeconomic situation. So if that means you're not eating any plants at all, let's start with eating one, and we work up from there. If you have an inkling like, I don't feel like I eat enough fruits and vegetables, that's probably a good inkling to follow, but we want to figure out, okay, how am I going to follow that? To what degree am I going to follow that? And how is this something that I can put into place in a non-restrictive, non-orthorexic manner if one of our goals is to increase the diversity and health of the gut microbiome? So with anything like this, it's like, wow, okay, because I've seen this in the research before. I don't doubt that it's true,
100%.
but it's also not realistic for a lot of people to just go, again, from 0 to 100. I mean, when I saw that, I was like, oh God, this is going to be an issue for a lot of people when they see this. And the way that I take this in most client cases is like, okay, if we just say eating more plants and being able to digest and assimilate them,
That's
one
the
way
ticket too.
that we can improve the diversity and health of the gut microbiome. Let's just try and, in general, see, are we eating enough plant foods? If not, let's work on increasing them in a realistic and attainable way.
Yeah. How can we meet my body where it is and then work on this incredible information that we have around incorporating these things? I think one of the things too that I think is important when remembering this stuff, like going alongside with everything you described about meeting someone where they are and what that looks like, is also talking about the challenges and barriers that come up for you executing this, right? Like, I can't eat 30 plants per week because one, who has the time? And two, who has the budget for the groceries for that? And then also on top of it too, then being like, okay, so then what does that look like from my body's perspective? What is coming up? Okay, what are the challenges and barriers that come up for that? How can I meet myself where I am? Which I love how you put that. And I totally agree with you. But yeah, I'm not surprised that this is beneficial for our gut, but that also doesn't mean that I'm telling people to eat the Costco-sized sauerkraut that they can buy every week.
Okay, well, Christina, that's only one plant, so that doesn't count. We're not talking about 30 servings here.
That's true.
We're talking
30
about
different
30 different plants. Yeah. Which, for clarification, includes fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, and also grains.
Okay, so here's a question too. So is it come down to like the variety and it having different types of fruit, like different types of plants, or is it like a whole bushel of strawberries? Is it a whole like kale thing? Like, I don't know what they're called. What are they called? What is the
I said bucket as a joke.
When you pull it out of the ground.
It's a bunch.
A bunch. There we go. Thank you.
Or a bundle. So what they're specifically talking about here is just the diversity, but this also includes herbs. So really,
you might actually be doing this more than you think, guys.
Right. Exactly. Because if you think about, well, maybe not 30, but if you, and we don't recommend this, but if you were to just think about, not count, okay, maybe I eat oatmeal or rice or pasta, and then I eat strawberries and blueberries and spinach and blah, blah, blah.
And grains. Grains are plants.
I just mentioned 3 grains.
Oh, I didn't hear you say that.
We're doing great. But yeah, so there's that to think about. But interestingly, this one has already passed the first stage of the vibe check, which is this evidence-based? And now if you go all the way back to some of our previous episodes when we talk about evaluating nutrition claims and wellness claims and how do we put them into place for people and health-promoting behaviors, the very first thing that we always check on is this evidence-based, and is that evidence legit? And so this is. But when we hear other things, like this is something we're going to do a full episode on, but I get so many questions from people in session about protein. How much protein should I be eating? I've been hearing this. I've been hearing this.
Oh my
I've been
God.
hearing this. And
if I get the protein question one more time.
I'm telling you, Christina, we're going to do a whole episode and be like, we have an hour-long thing on this. Here you go. I get this so many times that I hear so many different recommendations from what people are bringing to session of like, I've heard this and I've heard this and I've heard this. And I'm like, okay, well, let's look at what the current government dietary recommendations are, which I view as a minimum. And then we look at, for example, if I'm working with an athlete, what is the international sports nutrition recommendations based on the most recent research they've done? Then let's look at what stage of your life are you in. There's so many different things, but the regular person might not have access to all that stuff and probably doesn't want to do all that research either. So that's just to say, if you're seeing what feels like a very bold or not necessarily extreme, but like big claim like this, the first thing that we would like to, the red flag that we'd like to go up in your brain is like, where's this information coming from? What's their source? Is that source legit?
Always.
And we'll get into that actually in the next question that we're going to be talking about.
Which you're going to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. So we have another question from one of our patrons actually about adaptogens. So this is something we haven't talked about in a long time. But if you've been here since the dawn of time, aka the beginning of the podcast, you know I used
when
to
it was real talk with Dana back old school vibes.
And we did some real talk about adaptogens, I can tell you, because we used to talk so much about adrenal fatigue, which more people talk about as burnout or nervous system dysregulation now, which also episode coming up on those in the fall. But we had a question from the patrons. Have you heard anything about lion's mane mushroom supplements and it potentially being adverse for people with autoimmune disease to use? I have a friend who is loving it, and I did a little research, and one source says it increases immune activity, so it would not be good for people with autoimmune. But I've also read it's been shown to be anti-inflammatory, ? So we're going to dive into this. The first reminder is that no one thing is going to fix everything for you. That's the first blanket statement.
No matter how hard we want it to, guys, it's not going to.
Yep. The other prerequisite to this is, like I mentioned in the previous question, is what are the sources that you're getting this information from, and what are the sources of information that website or whatever is getting their information from? Because functional medicine websites and blogs, let me tell you, with very few exceptions, the blanket statement here is they don't source their shit. So they're just making tons of claims out here about, oh, this can fix this and this can not cure because the FDA would come after them, but this can fix this and this is good for this and this is blah, blah, blah.
Although they do talk about curing stuff, and I'm shocked how the FDA hasn't come after some people.
Yeah, that's true. Although the people who are claiming the cures are usually the uncredentialed influencers who probably don't even know that they're not allowed to say that.
True.
But so a lot of these, and I know because I've done extensive research on a lot of this stuff and being like, what are the functional medicine websites saying? Is this legit? Because a lot of the time, even when things are cited, if you click on the cited sources, it's just in that freaking blog. And I'm like, you can't cite a blog as your...
Let's go back to college lit real quick. It's like, that's not how citing works. You can't cite yourself.
Oh my God.
But I have a question for you. So, because I am so far removed from a lot of the overly clinical stuff, in my practice at this point, but I'm also reading this and thinking about how it increases immune activity, but also can be anti-inflammatory. Yeah. On the surface, I feel like that does sound contrary, right? But sometimes increasing immune activity is, in fact, decreasing inflammation, is it not?
Yes, but the point that I'm making here is both of these two sources are not actually providing where they got that information. So we can't even take it.
So we can't even go into that. If we don't even know if either one of those was even true. But I was going back to like the biochem days and thinking about like, wait a minute, can it be both? Like, so that's very contradictory, which already is the fact that we're already questioning, one, where was the source from? And two, if these things are even real or could be happening at the same time is also something else to kind of play into too.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that this person who asked the question like got bamboozled by these websites or whatever, because when I was researching for this question before we started recording, I was finding the same things. There are certain parts of your Google search that will be like, oh, these are immune stimulatory. And there are other ones that don't say that. And they say that, no, it's actually great for autoimmune disease and it's supportive for the immune system and it's anti-inflammatory. And it's like, well, so you have completely contradicting things. Is one saying this is good for people with autoimmune disease and one saying this is bad for people with autoimmune disease. So when you look in PubMed, you can find a whole bunch of different stuff. And the problem with adaptogens is that they have been used for thousands and thousands and thousands of years for different things. But the research for these specific, quote, healing properties is not really up to the thousands of years of use. So it's not saying that just because there's not a ton of research specifically on lion's mane for immune activity or something, that doesn't mean that that's not the case. But what that does mean is I can't back it up with a PubMed source. So anytime we're dealing with inflammatory diseases and autoimmune diseases, I would always caution with adaptogens and herbs, because the other thing is if you're taking any medications, there's a lot of different herbs that not only have adverse effects for medications, but there are a lot of herbs, specifically adaptogens, that can up or down regulate certain enzymes in your liver that can impact the way that your medications are metabolized, and basically the way that the dose that you have, it can basically change the way that that dose affects your body. So I would always be very cautious of that. But to answer this person's question, I will just throw a couple of sources into the show notes, because there's what I have heard the most about lion's mane is for cognitive function and focus. I have not heard a lot about it for immune activity or anti-inflammatory activity. I've heard a lot about other adaptogens for that kind of stuff. So just if you're curious, I'll put a couple of recommendations in the show notes.
I'm really glad you brought up the medications interactions thing, because that's what I was going to dive into too. I think, to be honest, this sounds like someone who has a very specific need for maybe some kind of supportive adaptogen, or maybe not even a need for it. But I think this goes into like a really great thing back to our prerequisites before is this relevant for me? And do I need support from a clinician to help me navigate this? The answer is yes. When you're starting to tap into using supplements or using an adaptogen, like Dana's saying, like there's a lot of factors at play that need to be verified, looked over, considered, including medications. And so to me, I'm glad your friend's loving it. And I hope that your friend is working with someone who's helping them cater those types of support to them uniquely. And then in which case we should be doing the same thing, because it's really dangerous to go playing down this road. And next thing you know, you're interacting with medications that are really important for you.
Okay, so to wrap it up, we have also, this is kind of a preview of, we've been seeing a lot about these specific topics that we're about to mention, but we didn't want to just do a 5 to 10 minute answer on a listener questions episode. We want to do like entire episodes on these.
Maybe even series if we need to, because there might be some background information we need to provide people. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Exactly. So a couple of the things that we have been thinking about, and we're planning on doing these in the fall, because, I guess I should mention this now. So if you all don't know, we always take a summer break in between our seasons. So this off season is going to be July and August. So you're going to get your regular episodes through the end of June. And then in July and August, the only thing that will be keeping going is the Patreon exclusives. So if you're part of our Patreon, or if you're interested, you can get a 7-day free trial. And you're going to get 2 full-length episodes per month, and then also some bonus resources to go along with those episodes in July and August. That's actually something that you get every single month as being a part of the Patreon. But if you're interested in continuing to have more education, more resources, continuing to hang out with us in the summer while the main show is on our kind of summer break before we come back in September, then I would go to the Patreon. But speaking of the fall,
I want to say a couple of little things. There's exciting things happening this fall. Okay, guys? Really exciting things that we're really excited about that I'm not to disclose. We're not ready to disclose it yet, but we're really excited about some changes that are coming to the podcast and things that we're doing differently. Some of those things is we're really excited to dig deeper into some of these really, kind of targeted topics that are coming up that we're seeing a lot of. One of them, I feel like I'm very heavily in the ads for this stuff and seeing the content everywhere about it, which is really interesting. I'm thinking part of that is probably my age, I think is something that's coming up, but I have absolutely no idea. But one of the topics is perimenopause. We've never talked about it on here. We've talked about cycles, but we've never talked about perimenopause. And I think the perimenopause world is riddled with a lot of all or nothing functional medicine type vibes. And so to me, we would really love to dive deeper into this topic for people and provide this more wholehearted eating approach to perimenopause support, the same way that we kind of did seed cycling 101 and what that looks like and how you can support it from there. And also understanding like the nuance between when are you in perimenopause? What does that mean exactly? What are the symptoms that are associated with it? How do I know whether or not it's something else or if it is actually maybe perimenopause, all the things. So that's like one thing that I'm heavily targeted on because I think it's because I'm 39. And so I get a lot of stuff about it and hear about it all the time. And then the other topic is that I'm really excited about is the lymphatic drainage stuff. I'm seeing it everywhere, down to like the gua sha type of stuff and like facial things. And then also to like all the way throughout your whole body, lymphatic draining, all the stuff and moving your lymph around, which I think is really interesting and something kind of cool. I would love to have a specialist on, but I don't know how safe they are. So Dana just made a face and I totally agree with that face. Like, I don't know if there is, which is a perfect opportunity for us to come in and kind of filter through the education a little bit and provide you guys with a neutral approach of, okay, what does this mean? Does it even matter? Do we need to do anything about this? Are we already doing everything about it? And we just like, they're obsessing over nothing or what? And so I think that would be kind of cool to dive into that I'm really excited about. And Dana, do you want to talk about the last one?
Yeah. So speaking of hormones,
Mm-hmm.
I guess before perimenopause, we want to talk about, and we've had kind of casually this weaved into a couple of episodes in the past, but we want to talk about periods
Mm-hmm.
and what happens and what can you do if yours goes missing, and what happens if you don't get it back when you feel like you've been doing all of the things. Because this is something both of us have been seeing more frequently with a lot of our clients. And then it also kind of ties into the perimenopause conversation of, am I gonna get it back? Like,
Yeah.
is it too late for me? Who knows? What does this mean?
Is this the start of perimenopause or is this the start of PCOS? What is it? Like, how do I know how do you differentiate between the two? What does that mean? How do you support it? Is there a different support for each different type? I feel like it's so many interesting things we could talk about.
Yeah. And then another thing that we want to do an entire episode on or a conversation about is how do you know when you should get some testing done when body changes are one of the main symptoms that you are experiencing? So if you've been able to see the thread through all of these, a lot of these have to do with body image.
Yeah.
So
at the
a lot of
heart.
stuff you can look forward to when we come back from our break. We're not going yet. You still have a couple episodes coming up.
Yeah, we're not going anywhere yet. And also, we're not going anywhere for anyone who's on Patreon. So please come join.
Correct. Yeah. And that, of course, that link will be in the show notes. I mentioned a couple of different episodes that we referenced in today's episode. If you have any follow-up questions to this, or if you'd like to submit a question for our next listeners episode, listener questions episode, which we try and do like once a quarter, roughly,
Yeah.
More
just
or less. Let us know. And then
have a nice week.
If you're interested in hearing more about what specifically is going to be coming up in our summer Patreon episodes and stuff, we did a whole kind of catch up with us and like look forward to what's coming on Patreon 2 weeks ago, which I will also link in the show notes as a little bonus episode for you all.
Oh, I love a little bonus.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Hey friends, it's Dana, and thanks so much for listening to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast today. Find us on social media at Wholehearted Eating Pod on Instagram and at wholeheartedeating.com for more information about working with Dana and Christina for one-on-one nutrition counseling. If you love the show, we would love you forever if you'd share an episode with your family and friends, or tag us on social media, or leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts to help more people find the show. Check out patreon.com/wholeheartedeating to help support the show and get access to ad-free episodes, bonus episodes with us and our guests, episode discussions, new resources we're creating for Patreon, and so much more. If you have questions for us, feedback on the show, potential topics or guests you'd love to have on, shoot us an email at hello@wholeheartedeating.com, and we'll see you next week.